St. John's Cemetery in Queens, New York. It's an imposing place, 169 acres, mausoleums, burial sites, unbelievable when you see it. But you know what's even more imposing? How many mob guys are buried there? Bosses, from Lucky Luciano to Carlo Gambino to John Gotti. Long list. Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michel Franzese. Hope everybody's doing well. All is blessed on this end. Praise God for that. And subscribers, thank you. We're on a march to 1 million. We appreciate all those of you who have subscribed. All my viewers, I appreciate it. You want to subscribe, jump on. You're getting us to that 1 million mark whenever that comes. It's all thankful to you for enjoying the content, and we appreciate it on this end. You motivate us and you encourage us to give you the best possible content that we could provide you with. And MichelFranzese.com, my crew, my inner circle. Take a dive. I think you'll enjoy it. And trust me, coming out of this pandemic, people are really benefiting from it. You get a lot of me on it. A couple of years back, I did actually a documentary. It was called God the Father. And it was based upon my life. My family participated in it. We shot it in Bulgaria and then Israel. We really had a great time. It was a wonderful project, and had a great time doing it. And one of the producers was a good friend of mine. We were driving from New York out to Long Island, and we drove over the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway after you come out of the Manhattan Tunnel. And I don't know if you've ever taken that drive, but right underneath is one of the biggest cemeteries you will ever see in this country. And it's called St. John's Cemetery. And as we were driving, I told him, I said, you know, you have no idea how many former mob guys are buried in that cemetery. It's very famous. The cemetery was established in, I think, 1872, and they actually call it like a boot hill for the mob. There's that many guys buried there. And I think the Catholic Diocese runs it, and it's really an amazing place. You know, they still have mausoleums. I mean, and it's expansive. I think it's 169 acres of property. It's huge. Mausoleums, gravestones, the whole bit. And I remember as a kid, when I would drive over the BQE with my dad, he would always tell me the story. He would say, you know, Mike, two things you got to know. He said, you know, a friend of mine offered me a lot of money to walk through this cemetery at night, and they all thought that I wouldn't do it, but I did it. Now, I don't know if that was a fairy tale, one of my dad's stories or whatever, but I can imagine it's a pretty imposing thing to do at night. Of course, we're not afraid of the dead, but, you know, some people got to have a little issue with that. And then he told me how my grandfather, you know, his dad, Tootie the Lion, they called him, when he came over here from Italy, he actually bought plots early on. I think he bought like 25 plots for the whole family. Now understand, my grandmother and grandfather had 19 kids, and I guess they thought every one of them would be buried, you know, all the Franzeses together. So he bought that, you know, over 100 years ago. But it really is an amazing place. Unfortunately, I've been there many times. A lot of my family is buried there. I'll get a little bit into that. But it is an amazing sight. You know, and I've been to cemeteries in different parts of the country. I was in New Orleans, where they don't put anybody underground because of the sea level. If they put people underground, they buried them, they would pop up. So everybody's in a mausoleum there. It's pretty amazing, fascinating. Actually, they have tours through that cemetery. But St. John's is just something else. And you know, I thought of maybe doing a little video to inform you about a number of former Cosa Nostra guys, my former associates, that are buried there. And there's a lot, but I got like 21. Most of them you're going to know who they are. Famous guys, notorious guys in that life. I thought I'd just go through it a little bit and give you some information about it. And like I said, it's pretty fascinating. You know, the sad thing is, as I was going through this, so many of these guys just did not live, or did not die well, I should say. Many of them died in prison. Some of them died because they were murdered. And it's really a sad story. It really is. And you always wonder, you know, when you live your life and you go through everything, where are you going to finally end up? And I'll be honest with you, people, I don't know how you go through life without believing there's something better waiting for us on the other side. And that's one of the things that I hold on to in my Christian faith. We're very clear. You know, if we confess our sins and accept Jesus Christ, that we are going to heaven, regardless of what we've done in our past. Now, obviously, God knows our hearts. We can't fake it. He knows if we're sincere or not. And then we have to try to live the right way. And I've sort of done that since I left, my former life and became a person of faith. And we believe there's something much better for us waiting on the other side. But some of these guys, who knows? We don't know what they did in the last moments of their life. I remember I was in Springfield, Missouri, and I was at a church, and the prison hospital, the federal prison hospital, is located in Springfield. A lot of guys went there just before they passed away, John Gotti being one of them. And she attended my service, and I was talking to one of the nurses that actually took care of John Gotti and a few others. And she was telling me some stories, because John, was very, very sad for several months. He lingered on. He died of cancer, and it was a pretty rough death from what she told me. And I always asked her, I said, did John have any second thoughts? Did he talk to you about anything? And she shared some things with me. I don't think it's appropriate for me to share it here now, but I'm hopeful that maybe John did make his confession, make his peace with the Lord, because fortunately, in the last moments of your life, you can turn it around. That's the kind of God that we serve. But I thought of a lot of the other guys. Some of them I knew, some of them, I knew of. And I thought I'd just run down so that you can see who is actually buried in this cemetery. And it's pretty fascinating. Again, I picked out 21. There are a lot more, but 21 that I'll just go through, and I'll go through them quickly because many of them you know about and you know their history. For you mob aficionados, I would say you probably studied up on these guys. I've spoken about them before, so we're not going to get into great detail. But when you drive into St. John's, it's in Queens, and when you drive into St. John's, as you get past the gates and you move in a little bit, you're going to see this stone building flanked by Grecian columns and denoted by the family name Lucana. And that's actually Lucky Luciano's mausoleum. And it's fascinating. It's beautiful. It's big. It's unbelievable. Beautiful. As beautiful as something could be in a cemetery. But it really is pretty amazing to see it. And you see these mausoleums all over the place. I mean, it's actually pretty fascinating to go through and do a tour of that cemetery. You'd be amazed at who's buried there. One of the oldest guys that was buried there was a guy by the name of Salvatore Toto di Aquila. And he came over here from Sicily in, I think, 1906. He was one of the original Mustache Petes. I think he was probably the first boss of the Gambino family, the way history tells it back then. He ruled the family for about 10 years until he was murdered one day. He left his house, and I think he was going to the doctor's office, and he was shot several times. I think they shot him once in the head and then 7 times in the chest to make sure that he was killed. He has a mausoleum there, pretty elaborate, pretty ornate, but he was one of the older guys that are buried there. Next, someone you're very, very familiar with, I just described his mausoleum, and that's Charlie Lucky Luciano. You know the story with Lucky. I'm not going to go through that again. We've done that. But Lucky was deported to Italy and tried to get back here to the United States. He couldn't. He died of a heart attack in Italy. I think he was 64 years old. And then his body was transported back to the United States. That's where he wanted to be buried. And he's buried there in St. John's in a very elaborate mausoleum. And everybody knows who Lucky Luciano was. He was the guy that really formed Cosa Nostra in this country, formed the Mafia Commission, and very, very highly regarded. If you want to talk about being a godfather, he was probably the original godfather of Cosa Nostra here in the United States. Next, we have Joe Profaci. And Joe Profaci, again, people know who he is. He is buried in a mausoleum, or is in a mausoleum. I shouldn't say buried, but that's where he's resting. And Joe Profaci, he ruled his family for about 30 years. They called him the Olive Oil King. He, again, came over here from Italy. After Joe Profaci passed away, Maiocco, who was his underboss, took over for a short time until the commission moved him out. Carlo Gambino was part of that. And then Joe Colombo became the boss, and I think many of you know my dad was his underboss for quite some time. I think you know what happened with Joe Colombo. The fascinating thing is all of these people are buried or resting a short distance from one another. If you go through the cemetery, you'll see, because it's a huge cemetery, but they all seem to be pretty close together. Close in life, close in death. Amazing. Next, we have Vito Genovese. I think you know the story there. He also has a mausoleum, pretty elaborate. And we know Vito took over for Charlie Luciano. You know the story, him and Costello were at odds. Costello was the acting boss for a while Luciano was in Italy. Genovese and him had kind of a falling out. Genovese was kind of power hungry. He wanted that position, so he took over. There was an assassination attempt on Frank Costello. I think you know Vincent the Chin Gigante. It was actually a botched hit. Frank lived through it. He was shot in the head, but it only grazed raised him and he lived through it. And Vito took over, but then Vito got indicted on a big drug case, ended up getting a long sentence, and he went away in prison, and he's buried there. And we know the story with Vito Genovese. That family name still exists today. And then we have Jimmy Napoli. They called him Jimmy Nap. I knew him. He was from my neighborhood in Greenpoint. He hung out there. He had a huge gambling operation. He was a captain in the family, very well known, high profile guy at the time. I met him a couple of times, met him with my dad when I was younger and met him a little bit later on. And Jimmy Nap is also buried there. Oh, an interesting thing about Jimmy Nap, he was indicted on a murder conspiracy for trying to kill John Gotti. Some of you may not know that, but that was kind of not what he's known for, but unfortunately that was part of his resume, I would say. And of course, and John, just as he was in life, pretty much the same in death. He's in a very elaborate building, kind of in the center of the cemetery. And everybody knows that that's John's site. Unfortunately, there are a lot of visitors that I understand that come in, tourists that come into town that want to see his site. And the cemetery doesn't really like that. They don't enjoy that, but they do allow visitors to come in at certain points in time. Then we have Carlo Gambino. Everybody, again, knows who Carlo was. Boss of the Gambino family. We did, a video on him. We talked about him. He ran his family for over 20 years. Boss of bosses, they called him at one point in time. And he's obviously one of the most infamous people buried there. And Carlo had, a better ending than most. He died at home in Long Island. He was 75 or 76 years old when he passed away. Didn't do much prison time at all. But, Carlo was the epitome, I would say, of what a mob boss should be. It was very low profile, very low key. The government had numerous investigations on him. They were never able to get him for anything. He lived his life the way a mob boss should live his life, undercover, total opposite of an Al Capone or a John Gotti or some of these more flamboyant guys. Then we have another guy by the name of Frank Abbandando, and he was called the Dasher, and he was part of Murder, Inc. And one of the fascinating things about him is that, he had a lot of victims from what they say, and he would use an ice pick and stab somebody through the heart. That's how he killed them. You know about Murder, Inc. They were responsible, they claimed, for over 200 murders. They were contract killers hired by Luciano and Lansky to do their bidding at that point in time. And I think we might have done something on Murder, Inc. at one point in time, but Frank Abbandando was a major figure in Murder, Inc., and he's buried there. Then we have Joe Colombo, boss of my family, somebody I was intimately familiar with. Everybody knows the Colombo story, Italian-American Civil Rights League, how he was gunned down, basically became, I hate to use the word vegetable, but after he was shot, he lingered for about 6 or 7 years, basically brain dead, until he passed away. He's buried there, so that's another boss. So you got Carlo Gambino, you got John Gotti, you got Salvatore Aquila, big guys that were buried in that cemetery. And like I say, it's pretty much a tourist attraction. People like to come and visit the gravesite. It's unbelievable. Then we have Johnny Dio Gotti. I met Johnny Dio once, and a long time ago, I was a kid. Johnny was a big union guy. As a matter of fact, he was pretty active with the Teamsters. I think he got indicted for labor racketeering a few times, but he also helped Jimmy Hoffa become the boss. So Johnny Dio, and I'm sure you might have heard that name. For those of you that study the mob stuff, I'm sure you know who he is. He's buried there. Then we have Salvatore Maranzano, again, one of the original Mustache Petes. He came over here early on. He was part of the Castello Moresi War against Masseria at that time. And Charlie Luciano, Lucky Luciano, was responsible for both Masseria's death and Maranzano's death. He was a boss, another boss buried in St. John's Cemetery. Roy DeMeo. Everybody knows who Roy DeMeo is, the Gemini Lounge. So many people ask me about him. Roy had a rough reputation. He's responsible, they say, for several hundred murders, many of them which he committed himself. I did have the opportunity to meet Roy. It's funny. I had 2 Jaguars at one time. This is going way back during my time in that life, and both of them were stolen. I was at somebody's apartment in Queens, and both of them were stolen. I made a couple of phone calls because I knew that Roy DeMeo had these chop shops. And by the end of the day, I got both cars back, and Roy was involved in that. But I did have the opportunity to meet him a couple of times, and he's a rough guy, and you know his reputation. He's buried there. Then we got Carmine Fatico. I don't know if you've heard that name. They called him Charlie Wagons, and the reason they called him that is because he liked to hijack transport trucks. He was a Gambino guy, and he's known to be a mentor, an early mentor to John Gotti, along with Neil Dellacroce. He was also one of John Gotti's mentors. Carmine Fatico, Charlie Wagons. Then we got Willie Boy Johnson. I'm sure many of you heard of Willie Boy. Willie Boy was not a made guy, obviously. He was an associate because he was an Indian. And unfortunately, with Willie Boy, he was a government informant from what we understand for over 20 years, from 1965 until the mid-'80s when he was murdered. And they say that the reason he became, or he gave the reason that he became an informant was because he did some prison time. He was under Carmine Fatico, and Fatico was supposed to take care of his wife and kids while he was in prison, and he never did. And as a result, he turned informant. I don't know if that's true, but that's what was told to us, and that's what he said. And I got a little bit nervous when we finally found out. As a matter of fact, I think I told the story before. I was shylocking money with Willie Boy. I liked him a lot. We got along. I asked John if it was okay if I shylocked money through him. He said, yeah. I probably put, well over 100,000 out on the street, and he was good. He paid the juice every week. And when we found out that he was an informant, Gotti and I were in MCC, the federal jail at that time, and I was up on the 7th floor, and the 7th floor behind the glass was where many of the WITSEC people were. And you could see them, but they were behind the glass. They wouldn't be able to communicate or associate with the rest of the population. But John sent word up to me. He says, Michael, this is what we're hearing about Willie Boy. Can you find out? And so, I was able to show him some papers and stuff, and I said, Willie, is this true? I held up a paper, I asked him a question there, I wrote something on it, and Willie Boy kind of shook his head, but he shook his head and made me understand that I had nothing to worry about. And he never did say anything about me, nothing whatsoever. So, I appreciate that very much, because he could have said we were shylocking money. Obviously, that's a crime. You're not allowed to charge, usurious interest rates. So, but he never did. But Willie Boy, he was murdered by Tommy Patera, and Tommy Patera actually did John Gotti a favor when he took Willie Boy out. And I think Patera was indicted for that, but I think he was acquitted. I don't think he ever went to jail for that murder. Anyway, Willie Boy Johnson, another person in St. John's Cemetery. They probably wanted to separate him from everybody else, but I don't know. I've never seen the gravesite. Carmine Lombardozzi, somebody that I was very familiar with, my former Goombata, Larry Carosa, was pretty close to him. And we sat with Carmine a couple of times. I did with Larry and Carmine. Carmine was a very intelligent guy. As a matter of fact, he had a number of nicknames. One was the Doctor, one was Alberto, another one the King of Wall Street. And they also called him the Italian Meyer Lansky. And he was known as one of the biggest earners the Gambino family had at that point. And I believe that. And actually, he was shylocking money to Larry Carosa. I didn't need it at the time, but he gave Larry some money, I think, to get his funeral business started. But I enjoyed sitting with him. He was a wise old guy, and he lived the life the right way. He's also buried in St. John. Then we got Vincent Papa. And Vincent Papa, he was a Lucchese guy, a made guy. And what he's known for is he stole the heroin out of the police department, the NYPD, that was taken during the French Connection. Yeah, and he was known for that. How he did it, I don't know. I don't know what the circumstances were, but that's what he was known for. Stole the heroin out of the NYPD lockup that was taken during the French Connection robbery. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Then we got Philip Rastelli. He was known as Rusty. He was the boss of the Madonna family for some time. He lived in Greenpoint. Unfortunately, he was away for most of the time that he was the boss. I knew him. My cousin Tootie, who was a maid guy with us with the Colombos, was very close to him, and I met Rusty a couple of times while he was home. I think he was home for maybe 2-3 years for the whole time that he was boss. And Joey Messina took over after Rusty was, I don't know if he died or he stepped down. I'm not sure of the circumstances there, but Joey Messina followed him. You probably know the story with Joey Messina. He got convicted of murder, and I think he was sentenced to a couple of 100 years, eventually became an informant and did some damage to the Bonanno family. But Philip Rastelli, another boss, buried in St. John's. Then you got Frank Funzi Tieri. I knew Frank. I had met him a couple of times. Again, I was younger at that point in time. But he was the boss of the Genovese family in 1972. He was a very low-profile guy. He was a diplomat. People liked him. I understand the soldiers under him liked him very much because he believed in sharing the wealth. I always heard good things about Funzi at that point in time. And again, another wise guy, another boss, buried in St. John's. And of course, somebody that we're all familiar with, or you are all familiar with, is Neil Dellacroce. Just a great guy, high-ranking guy in the Gambino family. You know the story with him. He was passed over for boss when Carlo Gambino died, and he appointed his brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, as boss. And people were not happy about that. Neil was a very well-respected guy. You know the story with him and Gotti. He was a mentor to Gotti. He loved Gotti. Gotti was very upset when Neil was passed over as boss. He never got along with Castellano. You know, later on, he orchestrated the hit on Paul Castellano, and then he became the boss. So Neil Dellacroce, another very high-up guy, again buried in St. John's. And last but not least, somebody that I have to mention, unfortunately, is my dad, Sonny Franzese. And he is one of the 20 or so, of our family members that was buried with his mom and dad, my grandparents, in St. John's. Like I said, I think there's 25 bodies buried there. And I think they stack them up, 3, 4, 5 high. I'm not sure exactly how it is. But we have a very extensive plot there, big headstones, the whole bit. My mom is also buried there. 2 of my sisters are buried there. I won't be buried there. I'm living out here in California, and I'm going to be, whenever that time comes, I'll be with my wife, obviously. And, it's something that we have to plan. We don't want to think about it, but we really got to plan, because we got to go somewhere when we're, when we pass on. And to make it easy on our family, it's good that if we have that, done in advance. Anyway, I thought you might find this interesting. It's if you're ever in New York and you drive over the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, you can't miss it. You're going to look down. You're going to see this huge expanse of headstones and, mausoleums and everything else. And obviously, grave sites there, St. John's Cemetery. So listen, people, I don't know what to say, about this. I'm just very fortunate that I was able to walk away from that life and not meet with the fate that some of these guys, some of my former associates met with. So many of them, died in prison. So many of them were murdered. I was talking to somebody from Netflix this morning. They're doing a series. They want me to participate. It's about certain mob bosses. I'm not going to say who it was. And they asked me what the difference was, between current mob bosses and mob bosses from, 40, 50, 60, 100 years ago. Basically, it was law enforcement that made the difference, because the laws that they came up with in the mid-'80s, between the racketeering laws and the Bail Reform Act, Sentencing Reform Act, I've said this before, they were so devastating. They put so many guys in jail. So many guys became informants. The life just changed because the government, came up with all of these weapons in their arsenal to go after the mob, and they really targeted the mob. It was different back in the days of Luciano and Capone. Yeah, if you were a Luciano, you weren't getting away with anything. Dewey, who was the prosecutor at that time, he was hot and heavy on Luciano, and he put him away for a long period of time. He got a 50-year sentence. Who knows if he was framed or not? I don't know. A lot of people say he really wasn't involved with, prostitution, which is one of the crimes he was convicted of, but who knows? But the bottom line is things were pretty much the same. It was law enforcement that changed and just, beefed up their arsenal and put so many guys away and changed the whole course of the life for so many people. And again, I'm just fortunate. I'm not one of them laying in that cemetery the way some of these people passed away, whether in prison or, in a very unfortunate circumstance. I'm just glad I'm here to talk to you about it and not sitting there now. I'll get there one day, but hopefully it's going to be under different circumstances. So that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed it. We got some other good things planned. You know how I always leave you. Same way. Be safe. And again, I'm not kidding. Rough world out there. So much stuff going on in LA. You don't even want to go down there anymore. New York City, I'm hearing the same thing. So be safe. Watch your back. Ladies, you get into a parking lot, look around. Make sure nobody's, watching you or doing anything they shouldn't be doing. Watch for shady people. Be safe. Be healthy. Okay, pandemic showed us something. Got to take care of our health. Get in the gym, eat right, do what you got to do. It's important. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart to all of you that have been supporting me. Thank you so much, but God bless you all. And yes, I'll see you next time.